I still remember that evening, the kind that sits heavy in your chest long after the house goes quiet. The light outside was fading into a soft orange, spilling through the tall windows of my empty mansion. The air smelled faintly of the old wood polish Martha used to love. I hadn't changed the scent since she passed. Maybe because some part of me was still waiting for her to come down those stairs and ask if the table was set right, but it wasn't her I was waiting for that night. It was my son, Adam. He hadn't been home in 6 months. Not since our last argument about the company he was running, or maybe since my last lecture about how business used to be done. I had called him 3 times that week just to say I'd made his favorite roast. He finally texted back, "Fine, I'll stop by." 4 words, no smile. No, Dad. Still, I told the staff to take the night off. I wanted it to be just the 2 of us, like old times, father and son. No distractions. I set the table myself, polished the silver, lit the candles. You'd think after 65 years I'd have learned not to expect too much from people, even from the ones you love most. But that's the thing about fathers, we hope. Even when we shouldn't. When I finally heard the sound of tires on the gravel driveway, my heart lifted. I walked to the door before he even rang the bell. He stood there, phone in hand, eyes glued to the screen. The boy I'd raised, now a man, successful, impatient, and far too busy for warmth. His suit looked expensive, but his expression was cheaper than ever. "Hey, Dad," he said flatly, stepping past me. "Smells good." "Your favorite?" I said, with a smile that felt too big for my face. "Roast beef, just like your mother used to make." He nodded, barely listening. He dropped his keys on the counter and scanned the living room, his eyes moving over the old furniture like a real estate agent appraising a property. "This place," he muttered. "It's still the same." I tried to laugh it off. I like it that way. A home should hold its history, or it should move on, he replied, his tone sharp enough to slice through the warmth I'd tried to build. We sat down to eat. For a few minutes, there was silence, the kind that hums between 2 people who've forgotten how to talk. I watched him eat, fast and distracted. Every time his phone buzzed, he glanced at it like I wasn't even there. Finally, I said, "How's the company?" He sighed. "Busy. Investors are restless." "You wouldn't understand, Dad. The tech world moves fast. It's not like your old school business days." "Old school built this," I said quietly, motioning around the room. "Everything you see started with the same principles: honesty, patience, and trust." He scoffed. "And look where that got you. Sitting in this giant empty house, polishing furniture for people who never visit." I looked at him then, really looked. His face was hardened, confident, maybe even resentful. There was a distance in his eyes I couldn't cross anymore. I asked softly, "Is that how you see me?" He leaned back, smirking like he was half joking, but his words were sharp enough to scar. "Dad, come on. Don't take it personally, but yeah. Old men don't deserve mansions they barely live in." For a second, I didn't breathe. The words hung there, echoing off the walls like they'd been waiting years to be spoken. I smiled faintly. Not out of amusement, but survival. "Old men, huh?" He shrugged, glancing at his phone again. "It's not an insult, it's reality. You've done your part. Maybe it's time to let go, downsize, enjoy whatever's left. Let the next generation build something bigger." I nodded slowly. "You think I've had my time?" He didn't answer. The clock ticked somewhere in the hallway. The roast had gone cold. The candles flickered, throwing shadows across the table, one over his face, one over mine. For a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, hiding behind those same eyes. The one who used to run into my arms when he fell off his bike. The one who once told me, "Dad, when I grow up, I want to be just like you." I swallowed hard. "You know," I said, "your mother used to say the house only feels alive when you're in it." He looked up briefly, guilt flickering across his face before he pushed it down. "Yeah, she was great," he said. "Anyway, I should go. Early meeting tomorrow." He stood, buttoned his jacket, and gave me a quick pat on the shoulder. Not a hug, not really, just contact. "Dinner was good, thanks." Then he was gone. The front door closed softly, but the sound hit like thunder in my chest. I stood there in silence. staring at the untouched glass of wine across the table. His napkin was folded neatly beside it, like a promise left unfinished. I walked to the window. Outside, the driveway was already empty, just the hum of the night. And my reflection staring back at me in the glass, an old man in a mansion, too big for one heart. Maybe he's right, I whispered. My voice cracked slightly. Maybe I've become irrelevant. The city lights flickered far off in the distance, like faint memories refusing to fade. I watched them until my eyes blurred, until my thoughts turned heavy. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, listening to the silence he'd left behind. And somewhere between regret and anger, I decided if my son believed old men didn't deserve mansions, then I'd show him exactly what an old man could do with one. When morning came, the mansion felt colder than usual. Sunlight crept through the tall windows, but it didn't warm a thing. It just revealed the dust I'd ignored, the untouched piano in the corner, the faint fingerprints on the banister from a time long gone. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the long dining table, the same table that had seen birthdays, anniversaries, even tears. The same one Adam once crawled under, hiding from me when he'd broken his mother's favorite vase. I smiled faintly at the memory, but it was short-lived. Memories, I've learned, are like old songs, beautiful, but they ache when you play them too often. That morning, I walked room to room like a stranger touring a museum. Every space told a story I no longer belonged to. The piano was still perfectly in tune. Martha's touch lingered there, somehow. I could almost hear her humming that gentle waltz she loved, her fingers gliding effortlessly across the keys. I used to stand at the doorway and watch her, pretending to read the newspaper, but really just admiring the peace she brought into this house. Then there was Adam's old room, posters still on the walls. A dusty baseball glove on the shelf, a medal he'd won at age 10 for outstanding perseverance. The irony didn't escape me. Somewhere between that medal and his latest insult, we'd lost each other. I stood there for a while, hand resting on the doorknob, wondering if the boy who once needed me still existed somewhere inside the man who now saw me as an obstacle. That thought lingered as I drove downtown to meet my lawyer. His office was glass and steel, cold, efficient, and impersonal, much like the world my son seemed to worship. I sat across from him, watching him adjust his tie before he asked, "So, you're really selling the mansion?" I nodded. "Yes, I've had enough of empty echoes." He blinked. "May I ask why?" It's a landmark. People recognize it." I leaned back, exhaling slowly. "It's just walls now. The people who made it home. They're gone." He studied me for a moment, then slid a folder across the desk. "You understand this will sell fast. Market's hot. You could easily get 30 million. I smiled without humor. 30 million for ghosts. Seems like a fair price. The papers felt heavy in my hands. My pen trembled just slightly as I signed my name. With every stroke, I felt like I was crossing out a piece of my life. One room, one memory, one dream at a time. When I walked out of that office, the sky had darkened. It was one of those early spring evenings when the air smells like rain and the city feels restless. I stood on the sidewalk, briefcase in hand, and looked up at the gray clouds. For the first time in years, I didn't know where I truly belonged. That night, I didn't sleep again. I sat in the study, the one with the cracked leather chair and the old map of the world on the wall. I stared at the shelves filled with photographs, Martha's laughter frozen in a silver frame, Adam's first day of college, our family trip to Italy where he tried gelato for the first time and said it was too cold for his teeth. It's strange how we build these sanctuaries of memory, only to realize one day that they've turned into prisons. I poured myself a drink, something strong, and scrolled through my phone. Out of curiosity, maybe masochism, I opened Adam's social media page. There he was, smiling beside sleek cars, hosting parties, giving interviews about reshaping the future of digital communication. Thousands of likes, dozens of comments calling him a visionary. But I saw something they didn't: the tightness in his smile, the desperation behind the bravado. I'd been in business too long not to recognize the signs of pressure, the kind that cracks people from the inside. So I made a few calls, quiet, private calls. old contacts who still owed me favors. Within a day, I had the truth. Avatech, his company, was struggling. Investors were pulling out. There were whispers of a possible collapse if a new round of funding didn't come through soon. My chest tightened. I wasn't angry anymore. I was worried, you see. It's one thing for your son to disrespect you. It's another to watch him drown in pride and pretend he's swimming. The next morning, I met with a realtor. She was young, efficient, her words clipped and professional. "It's a stunning property," she said as she walked through the foyer. "We could list it today, and I guarantee a buyer within the week." I looked around one last time. The chandeliers, the marble floors. The staircase Martha always decorated at Christmas. "List it?" I said quietly. She hesitated. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "I'm sure." The sale went through faster than anyone expected. Within 5 days, the mansion had a buyer, a young couple expecting their first child. I liked that. Maybe the house deserved laughter again. On the final day, I stood at the entrance while the movers carried boxes past me. My footsteps echoed across the empty hallway. I ran my fingers along the walls, tracing invisible memories in the living room. I found an old photo, me, Martha, and little Adam, all smiling beside the Christmas tree. I stared at it for a long time before slipping it into my jacket pocket. When I closed the front door behind me, it didn't sound like an ending. It sounded like a beginning. I drove away without looking back. The rearview mirror only showed a blur of stone and glass disappearing behind the trees. That evening, sat alone in a small apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, just quiet. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. There it was again, Avatech stock dropping fast. The online forums were buzzing, talk of failed deals, nervous investors, and rumors of a silent takeover. I stared at the numbers, then at my reflection in the dark screen. 4 years. I'd built homes, companies, futures for everyone but myself. Maybe it was time I built something one last time. Not for pride, not for revenge, but for legacy. I picked up the phone and dialed an old friend who ran an investment firm. His voice came through the line, familiar and warm. "George," he said, "it's been ages. What can I do for you?" I hesitated for just a second, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. Then I said it calm, certain, and steady. "I want to buy into Avatech. When I was younger, business felt like war. You didn't win by being cruel. You won by being patient. Patience. That's something my son never learned." 2 weeks had passed since I sold the mansion. I'd packed up my life into 5 boxes and moved into a furnished apartment overlooking the harbor. The view was beautiful, but lonely, the kind that looks better when you have someone to share it with. Every morning, I'd brew coffee and sit by the window, watching ships move slowly across the water. They always looked so steady, even when the waves grew rough. I envied that steadiness. On my desk lay a single folder, everything. I needed to start what would become the most difficult decision of my life. I wasn't trying to destroy my son. I wasn't even trying to teach him a lesson anymore. I just wanted him to understand, respect isn't taken, it's earned. I'd spent the week gathering information about his company, Avatech. On the surface, it looked strong, flashy marketing, growing customer base, big promises. But behind the curtain, the numbers didn't lie. Cash burn, investor panic, empty leadership, and pride, the kind that blinds a man right before the fall. So I made my move. I contacted a few old friends, the kind of people who didn't ask questions if the paperwork came clean. Through them, I quietly bought shares. Not directly, of course. I wasn't about to put my name on the first document that crossed Adam's desk. I used subsidiaries, small holding companies, a maze of legal walls that all led back to me. It wasn't about manipulation. It was strategy, the same strategy that had built my life's work decades ago. I still remember the sound of that first phone call, the hum of a fax machine in the background, the low voice of a broker saying, "Congratulations, sir. You now own 12% of Avatech." My fingers tightened around the phone. It wasn't victory I felt. It was guilt. Heavy, quiet guilt that settled deep in my chest. Still, I kept going. By the end of the month, I'd secured majority control. My name never appeared, not once. I was the ghost in the system, the silent investor saving a ship that didn't even know it was sinking. When the market started catching wind of Avitech's instability, a panic spread fast. Articles online called it a tech bubble about to burst. Rumors said the company might not make payroll within weeks. Adam, for all his confidence, must have been drowning under the pressure. I saw it in his interviews, his voice sharper, his smile thinner. I could almost see the weight pressing down on him. That's when I stepped in. Through my firm, I authorized a capital injection, $20 million, to stabilize operations. Enough to buy time, enough to save him from himself. It worked overnight. Headlines changed from Avitech crisis deepens to mysterious investor rescues startup. Adam Mustov felt like someone threw him a lifeline. He didn't know that lifeline came from the same hands he'd once pushed away, and maybe that was the irony of it all. The man he thought was obsolete had just saved his empire. A week later, he called me. His voice was different this time, slower, heavier. "Dad, can we meet?" I agreed, pretending not to know what it was about. When he arrived, he looked exhausted. The arrogance that once filled every gesture was gone. His tie was loose, his eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. We sat in my small apartment, a far cry from the mansion he'd mocked. I poured us both coffee. He didn't touch his cup. "It's been a rough few weeks," he said quietly, "but I think things are turning around." I nodded, saying nothing. "There's a new investor," he continued. "No one knows who it is, but they saved us." Just when I thought it was over, they came in and kept everything afloat. He exhaled, almost in disbelief. "Funny, right? Someone out there believes in me more than I believed in myself." I smiled faintly, watching him. Sometimes losing control shows you who really cares. He looked up, frowning a little, like he sensed there was something behind my words but couldn't quite reach it. "Yeah," he said, after a pause. "Maybe you're right." For the next hour, he talked not about profits or expansion plans, but about fear. About the sleepless nights, the pressure, the loneliness of pretending to have everything under control. It was the first time in years I saw the boy I used to know, the one who once ran to me for guidance instead of running from me. I wanted to tell him the truth, that I was the reason his company still had a pulse, that the man he'd called irrelevant had quietly kept his dream alive. But I didn't, because this wasn't about recognition. It was about love, the kind that doesn't need applause. When he left that night, he hugged me, not out of duty, but gratitude. It was brief, awkward even, but it meant something. After he was gone, I stood by the window again, watching the harbor lights flicker across the water. The same ships moved steadily through the dark, calm, unshaken, patient. Maybe that's what being a father really is. Staying steady when your children can't. I thought that was the end of it. But fate has a way of pulling you back into the storm, right when you start to feel the calm. 3 days later, I got an email from the law firm handling the investment group. A forwarded notice from Avitech's board, a mandatory shareholder meeting. Attendance required. Attached was the agenda. Item 3, introduction of new majority owner. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I leaned back, let out a slow breath, and whispered to myself, "Well, Adam, it's time you finally knew." The morning of the board meeting felt heavier than most. The city outside my window was just waking up, fog crawling between the buildings, horns echoing faintly through the streets. I sat there, tying the same blue tie I'd worn the day Adam graduated college. Back then, he'd called it the lucky one. I suppose luck runs in cycles. Sometimes it blesses you. Sometimes it tests you. By the time I reached Avitech's headquarters, the sky was pale and sharp, like glass before it cracks. The building was sleek, black mirrors and steel, too perfect, too cold. It reminded me of the mansion I'd sold, beautiful on the outside, hollow on the inside. Inside the boardroom, the air was thick with quiet tension. Executives shifted in their seats, whispering about the new ownership. No one knew it was me yet. I could see curiosity in their eyes, and fear. Then, the door burst open. Adam stormed in, his jaw tight, his eyes burning like I'd stolen something sacred. His voice cut through the silence. "Tell me it isn't true." He didn't sit. He just stood there, glaring at me across the long glass table that separated us, a transparent wall between two lifetimes of pride. "Tell me you didn't do this," he repeated, his voice cracking. "Tell me you didn't buy my company." I met his gaze and said softly, "I didn't buy your company, Adam. I saved it." I laughed, the kind of laugh that hides pain behind anger. "Saved it? You mean humiliated me? You wanted to prove I couldn't do it without you. That's what this is about, isn't it? Control? Always control." He slammed a folder onto the table. "I built this. I made a name for myself. And now everyone thinks I'm just your shadow again." His words cut deep, not because they were wrong, but because they came from the same pride I once carried. "Adam," I said quietly, "I didn't buy control. I bought your future. Because you were about to lose it." He froze. For a moment, I thought he'd heard me, really heard me. But then he shook his head, eyes filling with anger again. "You had no right." I leaned forward, my voice low. "No right. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to sit there, watching you drown in numbers and pride, while your mother's voice still echoes in these halls?" He blinked, caught off guard, and just like that, the room around us faded. My mind drifted back 2 years ago. The sound of laughter over dinner, his small hand in mine as we built Lego castles on the living room floor, his mother humming softly from the kitchen, her voice warm, alive. "Promise me," she had whispered once when Adam was still a boy. "No matter what happens, protect him even from himself." I came back to the present, my throat tightening. "I made her that promise," I said quietly. Adam's expression wavered, his voice trembling now. "You think this is what she would have wanted? For you to take over my dream?" I took a deep breath. "She would have wanted you to have a dream worth saving." For the first time, Adam looked lost. He sank into the chair opposite me, his anger giving way to confusion, to pain. Around us, the board members exchanged uneasy glances. One by one, they began to stand and quietly file out, giving us space neither of us asked for, but both needed. When the door finally clicked shut, the silence between us felt alive. He rubbed his hands together, staring at the table. "You think I failed, don't you?" I shook my head. "No, I think you forgot that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of it. You were chasing recognition when what you needed was responsibility." He looked up, eyes wet. "You always make it sound so simple." "It never was," I said. "But I learned the hard way that ego can burn down everything love builds." The words hung there. He swallowed hard, voice trembling. "I didn't mean to push you away," I smiled faintly. "And I didn't mean to hold on so tightly." The stillness that followed was fragile, like glass trying not to break. Then I reached into my briefcase and slid a folder across the table. He frowned. "What's this?" "Transfer papers," I said. "Every share, every ounce of control. It's all yours again." He looked at me, disbelief washing over his face. "You're giving it back." I nodded. "All I ever wanted was for you to remember that respect isn't earned by youth. It's kept by wisdom." Sat there, frozen, his lips parted, his breath shaky. Then, for the first time since he was a child, I saw tears in his eyes. He reached for the folder, but didn't open it. Instead, he whispered, "Why?" After everything. I looked at him, really looked at him. The boy who'd once built toy cars beside me. The man who'd grown too proud to ask for directions. "Because someday," I said softly, "you'll have a son who thinks you're wrong. And when that day comes, you'll understand everything I did." He let out a breath that sounded halfway between a sob and a laugh. "I don't deserve this," he murmured. I smiled sadly. "Neither did I, but your mother gave me grace. And I suppose it's my turn to pass it on." The light outside shifted, the golden kind that only appears when evening meets. Forgiveness. We sat in silence for a long time, neither of us moving. Then his voice broke the quiet. "What are you going to do now?" I stood slowly, gathering my things. "Go home," I said. He frowned slightly. "Where's that?" I paused at the doorway, looking back at him one last time. "Wherever that is now," I whispered, and for the first time, I left him not as a disappointed father, but as a man finally ready to let his son grow. I moved into the cabin 2 weeks after the meeting. No grand announcements, no farewell dinners. Just me, a single suitcase, and the soft creak of the wooden porch as I stepped into a life stripped down to silence. The place sat by a small lake, the kind that looked silver at dawn and black by nightfall. There was no luxury here. No marble floors, no echoes of wealth. Just the sound of water brushing against the dock and the wind moving through pine. Trees like whispers of things left unsaid every morning. I made coffee that tasted too strong and sat by the water, watching the mist lift. Some days, I fished. Most days, I didn't bother casting the line. I wasn't here to catch anything. I was here to remember who I used to be before pride got louder than love. I kept a journal, nothing fancy. Just a leather notebook with my initials fading on the cover. I wrote about the company, the house, Adam, and the silence that filled every corner between us. Writing helped. Words don't interrupt you, they just listen. At night, the loneliness felt heavier. The lake turned still, like it was holding its breath. I'd sit by the window and wonder if Adam ever thought of calling. But he didn't. Not yet, in the city. I knew he was struggling. Word travels fast in business, even faster in guilt. A friend from the firm told me Adam had been quieter at work, distracted. He spent hours in his office, staring at the empty chair I once sat in during the takeover meetings. He probably thought no one noticed. But people always do when a man is haunted by something other than numbers. It was a Tuesday night when the rain started, the kind that doesn't crash, just falls steadily, tapping on the roof like it's reminding you of time. I was making tea when I heard the knock. 3 short raps, hesitant, familiar. When I opened the door, there he was, soaked, eyes tired, standing in the same rain that had washed our anger clean. For a long second, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rain and our breaths, uneven, unsure. "Can I come in?" he asked finally. I nodded and stepped aside. He looked around the cabin, the fishing rod by the wall, the half-burnt fireplace, the old photo of his mother on the mantel. He smiled faintly. "It's smaller than I imagined." "It's enough," I said softly. That's the thing about space. Once you stop trying to fill it, you realize how much you never needed. He sat down at the small wooden table, fingers tapping nervously. "I've been trying to find the right words," he said, looking down. "But they all sound smaller than what I feel." I poured him tea. The steam rose between us like fog, thin, fragile, temporary. Finally, he whispered. "I said those words that night because I felt like you stopped believing in me." I looked at him, really looked. His eyes weren't angry anymore, just young, wounded. "And I sold that house," I said quietly, "because I couldn't stand living in something you no longer respected." The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was the kind that heals. The kind that says what words can't. He let out a shaky laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess we both let pride move in where love used to live." I smiled. "Happens to the best of us." We sat there for a while, the rain softening outside. He told me about the company, how he was learning to listen, to slow down, to lead without proving something every second. I listened, not as a critic, not even as a father, but as a man who finally understood what distance can teach you. Then he looked at me and said, "Will you ever come back home?" I took a sip of tea, eyes drifting toward the lake. The reflection of our small lamp shimmered on the water, fragile, flickering, but there. "Home isn't walls, son," I said. "It's peace." He nodded slowly, and for the first time in years, we didn't feel like strangers trying to make conversation. We felt like family again when he stood to leave. The rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, like forgiveness. At the door, he turned to me. "You know, I used to think success meant never looking back. But maybe it just means learning when to." I smiled. "That's wisdom talking. Don't lose it this time." He grinned faintly, then stepped out into the quiet night. The sound of his car faded down the gravel road, leaving only the hum of crickets and the soft sway of trees. I turned back to the table. That's when I noticed the envelope I'd left there earlier. My will. It wasn't finished yet, but it said what mattered most. I'd written to my son, "Everything I built was for you. But the greatest thing I ever gave wasn't wealth. It was the chance to find who you are." I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, and smiled. He'd find it soon enough. Outside, the moon broke through the clouds, laying a silver path across the lake. I stood there, feeling something I hadn't in a long time: peace without pride. The thing about time is that it has a way of softening even the sharpest edges. Years passed quietly after that night by the lake. Seasons came and went. Winters turned the water into glass. Summers filled it with the laughter of strangers fishing where I once sat alone. And somewhere in between those passing years, I grew older. Then, I grew still. I'm not telling this part as the man who once stood in that boardroom or behind that mansion's tall windows. I'm telling it as a memory now, the kind that floats between worlds. Light as dust, calm as the dawn. Adam was there when I left this world. He held my hand, just like I once held his when he was small and scared of thunder. Funny how life always circles back. I didn't have much to say that day, only peace to offer. And peace doesn't need many words. When he found my will, it was lying where he'd last seen it, on that same wooden table by the window. The one where the rain had once played its music. He sat down. The cabin empty except for the sound of pages turning and the lake breathing outside. My handwriting had faded a little, but the words still carried weight. To my son, I sold a mansion, but I bought my son back. That was the best trade I ever made. I could almost see his smile as he read it. That small, broken smile that comes when a man realizes love was never the enemy, pride was. Don't spend your life building walls, Adam. Build bridges. They last longer. He stayed there until sunset, reading every line, every pause. And for the first time, I think he saw me not as the father who corrected him, but as the man who loved him more than anything he ever built. The years that followed became his turn to rebuild, not empires, but meaning. He restored the old mansion, not as a monument to wealth, but as a home for aging veterans. He called it the Haven. Each room was filled with stories of men who'd fought, lost, and survived, men who understood what sacrifice really meant. The laughter returned to those walls. Softer this time, but real. And sometimes, when Adam walked those halls at night, he'd swear he could still hear his mother humming in the distance, or my footsteps echoing faintly down the marble corridor. He kept my photo on the mantel, not the one from my business years, but the one from that fishing trip when he was 10. I'm smiling in it, holding a small fish like it's a trophy. He used to laugh at that picture. Now, he says it keeps him humble. Every year, on my birthday, he visits the cabin. He brings fresh flowers, sits by the water, and talks out loud, just like I used to talk to him when he was too young to answer. He tells me about his son now, about how stubborn he is, how he wants to do everything his own way. And he laughs, saying, "Guess he's got your spirit, Dad." And maybe he does. Maybe that's the point of it all. We live, we love, we lose. And then we're remembered not for the houses we owned, but for the homes we built inside others. The last thing I wrote in my journal before I passed was this: maybe old men don't deserve mansions, but they do deserve to be remembered for the foundations they built. And if I could tell Adam one more thing, it would be this: you were never my disappointment. You were my lesson in patience, my proof that love outlasts pride. The camera would fade now, a slow pan across the lake. The evening sun laying gold over the water. Adam standing there alone but peaceful. He looks older now, softer, wiser. He holds a stone in his hand. One eye used to skip across that same water. He throws it, watching it ripple and vanish. And for a moment, I swear, he smiles. The kind of smile that says he finally understands. Because I'm gone. Yes, but what I left behind isn't absence. It's legacy. It's love. It's him.